This is an overview of the whole virtual lunar colony being set up to go online later this year. Now that the last major piece has been added, which is this rectenna, which means this is a device that receives microwaves from orbit, from the solar arrays that are collecting energy, and beam it as microwaves down here so that the colony has power. But this actually is all going to change. Antennas are pretty complicated, and infrastructure for a lunar colony is pretty complicated. And after consulting with people after designing this, I realized, because they gave me some tips, that it was better to put the solar array for this colony at a Lagrange point and have the resulting antenna be much simpler and always have a line of sight. So when you're building an entire town in space, it takes a while to figure out how to do things right, and so you have to be willing to change. However, it's good to show that thing because that structure was 1 kilometer across, and it was 5 kilometers away from this spaceport where we're coming on another little green figure here who's for scale. And this is just the beginning of the spaceport. But all of these things have to be sketched in so you get an idea of how a colony would really be, and so you can build something that really is a compelling representation of what it will take for us to actually move out into space and have an economy out there and start to extend our civilization but beyond our planet. So you have to be able to build on this kind of scale in order to justify the investment in the first place, because this is the only thing that creates an economy large enough to pay off. And to build on this scale, you also need robots that can do almost all the labor. And in order for them to have something to do that's worthwhile, you need these, which are regolith melters. These 5 stations produce 7,500 cubic meters of molten rock every month, which is then used to produce glass and ceramics and metals, and the molten rock is cast to make basic materials like pipes, and that allows the moon to have an economy in which they build space stations and spacecraft and satellites, and they build a large part of the skyhooks that allows mass transport between Earth and the moon. And these installations are examined in a video of their own. They're the solar thermal units. But I wanted to take a look at them here. This is just us flying around inside the working files for the settlement. These models are how the whole thing looks when I'm working on them. When they're rendered out for the online virtual colony, they'll look a lot better than this, but this is enough for now to give you a feeling of how it all fits together and why it's being done this way. You can see how far away those were from the main colony. They were put on the ridge so they have sun a greater proportion of the time. And down here we've got simple bulk 3D printers for low resolution materials like construction materials. And we've got a giant rover with another little green man on top. That's an example of the rovers that will do most of the work here. And we're just flying over all the factories. This is one of the factories that produces basalt fiber, which is a good material for cables, good enough to reinforce the habitats so that they can easily contain an atmosphere, and also good enough to suspend the elements of the habitats within them so that all the floors and everything like that are all suspended instead of being supported by beams, which is a lighter way of building things, a more efficient use of materials. You can see how many warehouses and factories there are here. These are just buildings right now. They're empty, but they're huge. I should have put another little man in here to give you a sense of how huge they are. They'll be filled with all kinds of things. They're molten regolith electrolysis units which extract the metals, and there will be glass production units which make glass for all kinds of things, not just for transparent glass like in this dome, which will later be a garden, but also just for building materials. And these solar concentrators are connected to chemical reactors that will be used to produce metal oxides and pure metals. And here we have one of the giant cranes will be used to build the HABs, and a row of another kind of metal refiner that produces pure metals and oxygen gas. All kinds of stuff will be happening here, but that all has to be developed more before we can take a real proper look at how all of that infrastructure would work. The habitats are where our efforts have mostly been directed, so we'll look at them. But let us admire Lalande crater for a moment. This is a highly accurate model of Lalande crater that I spent a long time building, based on images taken by the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. And we're passing over the central peaks, for instance, right now, which in a crater so young won't have much regolith laid over top of them. This crater is about 1 billion years old, which is younger than 99% of the moon's craters. So for instance, that would be a good place to mine for metals that aren't found closer to the surface. Also, the crater wall really is this steep in this part of the rim, so it's accurate to say that these habitats would go down the face exactly the way they are, taking advantage of the angle for lots of windows with long, beautiful views over the crater floor, and for extra protection against radiation. This set of long, narrow habitats cut into the crater wall are known as the galleries. They're narrow and deep so that they can take best advantage of the protection offered by the rock to the radiation, especially the cosmic radiation coming from the sky. And they're long so that they have a big sense of space. This one is a mile long and descends 500 meters. There's lots of windows, and when you're close up to them, through them you get a small dose of radiation from the sky, but they're set well back. You can see how thick the overlay of regolith is on top of these HABs by how deep the well of the windows are. So when you're looking at the ground as well, you aren't getting a radiation dose from there. So when you're inside these spaces, the only direction that you get radiation from is the windows where you can see sky. So you get to see a few stars with a pretty minimal dose that's safe over decades. The glass isn't visible in these views, but it's on the inside edge of these wells, so you can't get any closer than that view there. It's a dizzying look down from here. The floor is 50 meters away. None of the internal floors have been built yet. The floor is left with the irregular shapes that come from excavation, and the solid rock in it will be left exposed and natural. The yellow tubes are the cooling system. In the walls of them there's coolant, and air is blown through the centers of them that picks up heat from inside the HABs that are actually full of sunlight during the day from light funnels that aren't visible right now. And that heat is pumped through this box and down into this deep anchor drilled in the rock. Those have to be there anyhow, so that the pressure of the atmosphere on the roof is held down, and they're extra deep and large so that coolant also carries that heat into the ground, which is about minus 20 degrees Celsius. This volume will have 12 to 18 levels in it, each one about 4 meters high, and with large openings between the levels that go all the way down so that some sun reaches right down to the bottom. Branching off from the sides of the galleries are the tubular habitats that are glazed on 1/6 of their curved walls, with a big broad view that's as close as you can get to being outside while you're inside. In the top half of these volumes, you see only the crater floor, so these are very low radiation areas. And when you're down lower, you see a fringe of sky, but a small enough fringe that it is not a significant radiation risk. Now we're going to cheat and fly through the wall to the next gallery, but all of the galleries are connected by tubular habitats. This space has a different look: peaked windows for a taller view, shallow arches over a much wider space that isn't excavated as deeply. It works better in this less inclined part of the crater wall, deeper in the crater, where the ground is mostly rock with very little regolith mixed in. The galleries are built sequentially as the population of the town grows. This one is the third one that's built, and so it gets this special dome at the bottom now that there is the glass making facilities to look after that big observation window. To see lots of sky and have lots of sun without any fear of radiation in a broad, clear view, this glazing is simply fused quartz that's 3 meters thick. The dome is left mostly open, with few levels inside of it, and with a natural rock floor that curves, so it can act as the first park in the settlement. But the jewel of the settlement is obviously this structure, which is built last, the long dome. This structure is so huge that in order to let in lots of light and broad views of the exterior, while enclosing all of its space, it's almost 2 kilometers long and 200 meters high in the middle and 400 meters wide. It uses a mix of techniques to keep the amount of glass involved in that manageable. The cast stone arches of the roof do most of the protection and also dilute the level of sunlight to a pleasant level, so the glass between those is only a few centimeters thick. There's a tunnel here back to the dome, so there's easy traffic back and forth, though the route is over 1 kilometer long. The dome was placed here because it's a level patch of land with a natural rock ridge, and that rocky ridge suggests that bedrock is close to the surface in this spot, and rock like that could well be worth mining. 2 small artificial lakes have been created inside the dome, and the vertical buildings at the ends are apartment buildings for about 10 or 12,000 of the residents of the settlement. Remember the scale here. The trees you see are over 100 meters tall, and this is the cut where the mining was done. It may well be that bedrock like this could have minerals that aren't on the surface. Early extraction efforts here are then followed by larger operations elsewhere in the crater. The giant spiral ramp and the raised walkways are great examples of what you can do in this low gravity when you suspend structures from above rather than supporting them from below. The support cables haven't been put in, but they'd be thin enough that they wouldn't be very visible from any distance. All of these vast spaces need to be filled with the homes and businesses and gathering spots and all the things that are part of daily life in a town of 25,000 people, which is what this is. When the virtual colonies open, you'll be able to reserve space here and use tools we provide to build any one of those things. And as long as you visit occasionally, that space will remain yours, and you can use it to interact with others. You'll also be free to contribute to further development of the infrastructure of the colonies, bearing in mind that this is a technically realistic representation of our possible future on the moon if we really went whole hog. The colonies will be continuously fleshed out and evolving, and the resources will be offered as a setting for games or movies or live events. My hope is that by sharing a rich vision of our future that we build together, we'll come to realize how big it really is. The atriums where the farming is done, the spaceport, further areas of mining, and all the manufacturing infrastructure that was mentioned earlier. That all needs a lot of development, but this is how this settlement is going to be laid out and how it's going to work. The main job now is making it beautiful and opening its doors.